Well, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is David Missall with Sennheiser, and welcome to our forum with some of the top consultants in the world and discussing projects and what's going on now as we work through the crisis that we see with COVID and how jobs have changed, how they've stayed the same. I think we're going to have a really interesting talk. I'm really happy to have everybody here on board. Thank you all for joining us today and taking time to share your ideas and your expertise. I really do appreciate it. And just to let people know as we go through, if you would like to ask some questions, there at the bottom of your panel of your Zoom, there's a Q&A, and please ask any questions there. And after a little bit, we'll let some amount there, and then we'll grab some of those questions for you. There's also a chat. If you have an extra comment, you can put it in there. But for all questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we have some time for those questions. Excuse me. So I'd like to introduce our participants today, and I'd like to start with Mark Peterson. Mark, thank you for joining us. Mark is principal at Shen, Milsom, and Wilke, global AV discipline leader and corporate market leader. And before working with Shen, he's been there for 4 years. He was vice president at Morgan Stanley, Unified Communications and Collaboration and global head of multimedia engineering. And he was also the principal architect with Morgan Stanley for their standards for collaboration spaces and desktop interoperability. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
And I'd like to also welcome Eric Kinsinger. Eric is senior consultant at Cisco Hennessy Group, a strategic design engineer with over 23 years of extensive experience with audio for video systems, network cabling, access control, fire alarm systems, video surveillance, etc. He's worked on projects such as BMW for telecom and security design in Houston, and Time Incorporated as well for AV system design out in Seattle. Thank you for joining us, Eric, very much.
Thank you.
Also with us is Brian Brustad, principal at Cerami. Brian serves as the head of the Washington, D.C. and the Philadelphia, PA office. 20 years background in technology and acoustic consulting, an expert on building technologies and AV IT systems design. He's also has been the past chair of the AVIXA Professional Education and Training Committee. And also, a little personal note, he's a San Francisco Giants fan and has 2 kids. Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Thank you.
Martin Van Dyke, thank you for joining us as well. Martin is senior consultant, partner, and head of design at Engineering Harmonics. He studied at the Royal Conservatory of Music, then toured professionally as a musician, then as a mix engineer. I think we know where this is going. So obviously really grabbed onto the technical side of things. He's worked on numerous performing arts, enterprise, and government projects around the world, including AT&T Performing Arts Center in Dallas and the Kaufman Center in Kansas City. And it looks like he had a really interesting project in Mumbai, a residence video cinema system. That seems like was pretty exciting. A $1 billion home. I bet you that was fun to design that.
It was very interesting.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
And last and certainly not least, Pat Gallardo, associate with Smith and Anderson, more than 20 years of experience as an expert in audio and visual, collaborative and performance sound technologies, involved with designs of theaters and art galleries, post-secondary facilities, offices, and much more across the country. Thank you for joining us, Pat.
Thanks for having me.
And so as you can see, everybody, we've really got a great wealth of knowledge and expertise here with us today. And I think we're going to have some fun and learn about quite a bit today in this day of AV and IT technology. And I sort of kind of want to just dive right into it and discuss how things have really changed when you think about it. When this all happened, existing projects, it came to a halt, and the designs changed, and the customers suddenly their needs changed and are continuing to change as they're trying to learn. So Brian, I'll start with you. How did you deal with that? How were you able to really pivot to handle this change suddenly come from the customer, and their whole need spectrum changed? How did you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we did have quite a few projects go on hold. Luckily, construction industry in a lot of areas were able to keep going. So we were seeing a little bit, projects that had already hit the ground and were in construction, kind of stayed in construction. We were able to, our team has actually been working on site, all the way through this for essential projects. But the projects that really hadn't hit their stride, absolutely, they started getting put on hold. And I think it all comes down to clients' needs when you're a consultant. What's driving your clients and where your client's headed. With COVID, a lot of that was around safety of their staff. How are they handling the work from home? How are they handling safely bringing them back in? How are they making them feel comfortable that their health interests are in mind? How do we make sure that they know that they're safe and comfortable? So we focused a lot of projects on that, where we've had a lot of really just quick design, visioning, strategy sessions around those types of projects. And then the other thing is a lot of clients have facilities teams in board, especially the enterprise clients, Morgan Stanley's of the world. And for them, it's, what happens when the floodgates open back up and all of these projects that we needed to get done last year now need to get done next year, along with all the projects that were supposed to happen next year, right? So how do we make sure that we're ready, shovel ready, as I call it, with the projects that need to move forward in the future? So I think that's kind of where we're seeing the stride, and what's keeping us busy right now.
And now is it having to reteach the client what is important, right? Because that has changed. They thought they knew what they wanted, right? And now that's changed. So has that learning curve really slowed things down, or they had to really just trust you and this is the way it's going to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of a lot of the people on this call with me are going to disagree with this, but I've stopped teaching my clients. My clients at this point are people that know as much about AV as I know, almost a lot of the time. There are still a few, but I'm not going to go in, like right now. One of my clients is CNN, right? I'm not going to go in and CNN and tell them that I know AV better than them, or Morgan Stanley. But I think that I think they're realizing that there are things that they might not have been considering that were important. And I do think they're starting to change with the meeting spaces, especially. As people move back into these conference spaces, I think we all now know it's going to be a hybrid meeting, right? There's going to be people working from home. There are going to be people working remotely. And so now the experience from the far side is a lot more important, possibly, in the client's minds. I was saying earlier to this group that I have a client with 600 conference rooms where they said, we always knew the experience was pretty poor audio-wise in these conference rooms remotely. And, now we want to do a project and we need to have this done by December when when the majority of our team's back, right? So I do think, I think our clients are seeing a few changes that we're responding to.
Mark, you want to comment on that as well?
I would also add that we have a lot of clients, mature clients that actually have a lot of skills and more skills than us, and sometimes. But as consultants, sometimes you become the voice of reason through their changes in management. So sometimes there is that part of the process that COVID has caused, where they've restructured some of the people within the organization, and you're the voice that's carrying the continuity of management through it. So sometimes that occurs as well through the COVID, where in past you might not have encountered that. I've seen that pop up more frequently since COVID.
Yeah, personnel changes.
Yes.
Yeah, let me join in on that one because I think it's an interesting topic, and I do think that what Brian was talking about in terms of us telling, obviously now it's a lot of listening, and it's also our clients are looking for examples. I would say this is a next level of innovation, right? They're looking for, if you flip the whole thing over, where are the solutions happening? What are people doing that's successful? How do I learn from what others are doing? And when we're encased in these little ecosystems, it's very hard to know what other people are doing, right? And that's really our job, is to kind of share across and to benchmark, and also to explore ahead of their decisions some of the choices and pitfalls. And to that, what I think they're looking for and what I see happening, obviously, gone are the salad bars, right? And 150 square foot per person just became 250. So change the rules there, and we've got to brace for the long haul. This isn't something that's going to be done tomorrow or gone tomorrow. This is going to be a new normal. And everyone's looking for, what is touchless meeting? What does that mean? And it's not necessarily at the time to do a panic response, right? And maybe the wipes are going to last for a little while, at least get you by for a couple of months. But yes, you need to look at what is strategic for me to do. And particularly when you have dollars being at risk, right? I don't have a lot of money to spend now. I want to make strategic decisions. I just don't want to throw in web cameras everywhere and assume that's going to be great. If I do a little bit more, do I get more out of it? So what I do is I go through what I call Magic Quadrant. And we know Magic Quadrants typically are used when you look at a product and you say, does it, where is it in terms of its ability to execute, and where is it in terms of completeness of vision? So in the upper right-hand corner is typically this point where it's the ability to execute and the ability to have vision, or in this case, strategic capabilities. So we try to weigh out for a client, get them to weigh out what are the priorities, what are the important factors to them, which they're different. If I'm in the middle of doing an installation and all of a sudden I've got a hold, or if I'm not yet in the middle of a project, I'm in completely different parts of trajectory of investment. Either I got to put something in place into my offices right now that'll get them by, or I better not buy anything until I know exactly what I need to buy, or I just bought stuff and, well, is it going to work for what I want to do? So when I'm in that environment, I look for that part that says, this is relatively easy to execute, I can get this done, and it's going to give long haul. And in those areas, some of the key things that come out are things like voice control, and not by regular voice control, but let's say voice control. That's not necessarily really easy to execute. So I would say that's harder to put in place, but BYOD, that's fairly easy, because it's my device, my laptop, I can do that, I can put it in. Wireless sharing, I can also add that into spaces so I don't have to put in a lot of infrastructure to get that done. And then there's room booking and room reservation technology. And clearly I got to have some sense of statistics, analytics, and what's going on in those spaces. And I can put in room reservation technology and use and start to count those things now, and I'm going to need to. So, and that's not normally an AV kind of thing. It's this kind of combined AV and other, workspace elements that come into place. So I just want to share that with our audience, that there is a way to strategically look at pros and cons of each of these different areas that's a right fit for them. And there isn't a perfect solution for every company. And that our job is to bring to light those innovations in creative spaces. And we'll get into them, I think, a little bit later.
Anybody else, any other comments? Yep.
I will say what's exciting about what Mark just said is that a lot of the manufacturers are already responding to these client needs. So with touchless, we've seen, look at all the manufacturers that have really taken hold of touchless AV with business analytics, right? This is something that consultants especially have been driving in the AV industry. How do we prove ROI? How do we present technology in a quantitative way to the C levels, to the IT teams? And we're now, I think if there's a silver lining to all this is definitely increasing adoption and pushing our technology to these more forward-thinking, enterprise-level thinking technologies.
Yeah, so the IT side of things is really pushing it. If you look at Microsoft Teams and 365, Zoom, they've innovated so quickly and have had to, and have really pushed that conversation, at the drawing board of going their way and creating that infrastructure. It's really moved quite fast, but you still have the support for it as well after it's installed. And has that been a challenge, thinking about how to support it after the fact as things move so quickly?
Great question, but I'd like to see if Pat or Eric want to respond to that one.
I mean, with, the Zoom and Teams and, other flavors out there, Cisco, WebEx, and Polycom doing whatever Polycom's deciding to do this week. We have those challenges, and some clients still haven't adopted which flavor they're going to do. So you do have some challenges of which one you're going to do for design. Some clients say, oh, we're going to do Zoom this week, and then all of a sudden decide to do Teams. I mean, the equipment's interactive and interchangeable between, but we do have that design challenge. Sometimes you say, okay, you have to do it this way, or you have to do it this way. One client, I have an example, they're using Polycom codecs and making them Zoom appliances. But it took them 6 months, and they finally have decided to use those as Zoom appliances. But that has brought on a whole nother set of challenges, because what works on a Polycom doesn't work on a Zoom. So it's definitely interesting. But we're working through this. But these companies are pushing, everybody working from home and everybody doing their own thing, which is great. There are people that do have to work in the office. I'm the only person on this panel that is truly in the office today. So it's kind of nice, but at the same time, I'm in the office. And we're still doing Zoom calls, we're still doing Teams calls, and WebEx calls, and everything else. But we all know that every one of these presents a different challenge. I mean, everybody has a different background for every type of one of these calls. I mean, I know Mark's got a different background, Brian's got a different background, Steve's got a different background. I chose no background today, but depending upon which one you're using, that's what people have. So it's just keeping up with how fast that is changing also.
You asked the question, I think, about support and how do you support these things and what's going on with that. One of the things that I would recommend that our clients consider is what I call triangulation. When you use technologies like desktop video conferencing, the chances of any problem happening between the point of it coming from my location to your location is quite a few different spots where the issue can happen. And obviously one of the most remarkable things that we've seen, and it's really a success story, is the ability for these platforms to support the amount of utilization. Can you imagine what it would have been like if we went back a couple of years and this happened? There's no way we would be talking. We would be on the phone in 5 minutes, so frustrated with the situation. So it's like amazing that these products have proven what we would call mission critical, right? Before you wouldn't even think about having it. Now executives want to have their next stand-up meeting, right? Which we would before have ultra professional and super redundancy. They want to do it over Zoom. They want to do their largest, most important calls because they're seeing the value here, right? How you test and how you support these, one of the things when I talk about triangulation is having a point of reference, a good known location, so that David can call into that location, Eric can call, I could call, and I know I'm good to there. So I know I'm good to a certain spot, and now I can back up. You use the tools that are in these products that allow you to pre-test before you come in. You invest in reasonable, good technology for your users. There are a lot of calls and a lot of people really frustrated with this technology, and there are a lot of people that are using it very successfully. You also need to install a level of how-tos for these organizations. How-to from an instructor or a leader, and how-to from a participant. What are the tools available to me to really excel? Can I move forward into the conversation? Can I use body language? Can I find the people that are not talking and bring out their thoughts, right? These strategies reinforce how to use these tools most effectively. We can't just simply take a meeting or Eric's conference room and pop it into another, into this new environment and expect those tools to be successful. We need to rethink and re-innovate.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, actually, like we're seeing a lot of people being forced to adopt the technology that we're hesitant to use in the past. As Mark mentioned, we're seeing a lot more Zoom calls, and we're getting requests from some of our legal clients, who law firms and so on, that they're doing virtual court sessions over Zoom now, which you would never even see before in the past. And a lot of these executives that were scared to touch technology, being forced to do Zoom calls, Teams calls, and all this, and IT's has had to step up as well, because in the past, if they didn't pick a product, or they were using the free Zoom trials and things like that, it kind of forced them to evaluate the different platforms and commit, where before they were kind of on the fence, or using Skype for Business and not really sure where they wanted to pivot, right? We're seeing that right now with a lot of our clients.
And another thing to add, imagine if this was 10 years ago, when nobody had the bandwidth at home that we have today. Could you imagine trying everybody doing a Zoom call 10 years ago, trying to communicate and work from home? It wouldn't have been possible.
No.
I mean, everybody's got better bandwidth at home. And that's one of the things that has made it possible for everybody to work in both locations, because you are communicating from home, to everybody else.
Yeah, that's trying to change quite a bit. I mean, even if you look at what the broadcasters are doing now, ESPN's got people doing video switching from their living room.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I'm working with CNN right now, and all of their talent, except for 2, are currently doing their hits from home.
Right, and relying on their home network for the most part.
Yep, it's their home IP. They're not bringing in circuits, and they're using a particular manufacturer's, soft codecs. And I'm sure you've seen on the screen who that might be. And it's and you know what? I keep telling them, I was like, why are we doing these studio cameras? Pretty soon you're going to see, what soft codec cameras in a studio, because it's working, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's amazing technology, and I think this could have happened without IP, right? As much as some people on the call might, remember the good old days when we weren't network designers, and we didn't, everything was smoke and mirrors and AV, and it was glorious. This is a new type of glorious, and I mean, you talk about maintenance. You look at redundancy and the level of support, and even 1929s, you couldn't get that in an AV system 10 years ago. But now that everything's moving IP, we can actually start getting almost a carrier class level of support from our systems, and oh my goodness, is that a breath of fresh air for someone that a lot of his time is troubleshooting.
This is certainly the first question almost now that you think about is what's the IT infrastructure in that install, and whether and really, if you think about it, whether you're doing a live sporting event, or if you're doing a touring show, or if you're doing an install or classroom technology, this is what we're thinking about first, is IT. So has that finally now melded and is acceptable together, IT and AV? Is that the way we're going to think now? And will audio is audio now back on the forefront? Because typically with these type of installs, audio was whatever, right? Audio, that's not the most important. Audio is a stepbrother of most productions and installs. Is this changed now? With what's happening, and we have to be careful of that as we meld IT and AV together to make sure audio stays important.
Well, I think if you don't mind, I'll comment on that first. But from an audio point of view and a video point of view, in the last 2 decades, there's been a march forward with video and its capabilities and transport and image quality. So it's really taken the forefront. But at the end of the day, if you work with various different clients, especially with government and legal firms, and you actually see it on Zoom as people have gotten over the fascination with the video. I've attended many Teams meetings, for instance, that are audio only. The video is not of interest to everybody. But what's happened is that audio has become an important part, because it's actually for legal firms and government, it's actually the most important thing that's captured, not the video. The video is actually secondary in many cases in terms of a record of what's happened during that particular meeting. So I think it's become more important and people become more aware of it. So the transport and distribution is really important. And what's fascinating is if you get to those large projects where you have an IT infrastructure demand that's very high in terms of delivery quality and QoS, you'll find that those IT partners are remarkable. And what you're actually be able to deliver, and I've done very, very large projects where everything, including all of the card access, PA, video, computers, scheduling, everything's on these networks, and you think, oh my God, if something goes wrong, but it doesn't. You have hiccups, you have problems, but it's quite remarkable what's actually occurring in the last 10 years and even in the last 5 years in terms of delivery and consistency, and how some of the IT partners are really stepping up. And
Yes,
that's
thank
for
goodness for
us,
VLANs.
really,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that, Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Martin. I was just saying, thank goodness for VLANs.
Oh.
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. It's remarkable, but what we're doing and what we're able to do, where previously if we've done that, and I don't know any of you, but I've had that experience where the network dropped out, and it wasn't a big dropout, but it was one that was very painful to live through. So I think we're at that point where we actually can have confidence. And in recent months, of course, with COVID, one of the things I've had to deal with is government and the virtualization of government, as I say. And I've had to work with the Zoom partners and Microsoft quite closely. And it's remarkable how they've mobilized and how they've changed and built their products. And we're seeing updates from Zoom every single day.
Yeah.
And what they're actually able to deliver now, even from January, and to what their product is now, is quite remarkable. And that speaks to your comments earlier, both Brian and Mark, that it's about the partnership we actually have with some of these major integrator of technology. They're part of our team now.
And there are new ones coming on. They,
Exactly.
if I can jump in on that, because I got a little bit of different take when we talk about audio, if I may, Martin.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think what I see is we've just blurred the boundaries between consumer technology, prosumer, and the enterprise, and we're not going back. And let's just take, Alexa voice control, because a lot of our clients are going, well, what about Alexa? Can we use that so we don't have to touch anything? And I actually, just in the last week, so just to give you a sense of how recent those things are, Alexa's just gotten, for a while, almost 2 years now, they really corrected Alexa for Business, Alexa able to interop with Poly and other products, and Logitech Tap. And I was able to take a product and put it in with Alexa, add my rooms, and I can now, say, Alexa, start my Zoom meeting, right? Alexa, book a meeting. This took a fairly short period of time to do, right? It's the kind of thing we need to do to be able to tell the client, yes, this is possible. Here are the things you need to think about. So that's audio on another level, right? In terms of how do I incorporate that into a room? Well, you can. What are the risks in terms of, what information is going to be heard? Well, what is your health risk against the security risk? We'll have a new conversation about that. But the use of USB devices, USB audio devices in those spaces has now become much more of a greater option. And once you get into USB, it's much harder to mix, right? So we're figuring out the scientifics on how to pre-mix that stuff. And then that's where the Dante USB world is really getting fantastic in terms of taking what was on a DSP and putting it into a PC and being able to mix that. That's right on the edge. We're seeing our manufacturers innovate as if you put gasoline on a bonfire. And within the next couple of months, you're going to see an incredible amount of product and innovation spaces that we can't even keep up with. And Sennheiser is an example of a company, and I am, as I think most of us here are, non-partial in terms of we don't sell product. We look at the best products that are available in the market, and we advise our clients on the pros and cons and help them make the right choices, right? But what's interesting about your company is that you straddle these different areas of consumer, prosumer, and provide a high quality product. and where those choices need to be made. In particular, I'll use this example because I have a client that's trying to put in over 100 rooms, 150 rooms in campus by September, right? Get them all Zoom ready.
Imagine that.
What am I going to do first? And so one of the things that's been real recent is the use of ceiling microphones, right? The last 2 years, it's been throw ceiling microphones into these rooms.
It's really
Hey,
amazing.
that'll do it. I cover everybody. But you know, you got distance, you got physics to deal with. You've got the reverberation of
The
the room.
physics don't change, right?
Yeah. So before, you know, the concept was pre-pandemic was I can hear everybody in the room because I couldn't hear anyone before. And now you've got to weigh that against my ability to hear me in this kind of environment versus me hearing somebody from 15 feet away. So the reverberance in a room sets the reference point for the ear in the mind of how far away a person is, right? So when you do that and you put ceiling microphones into classrooms or conferencing rooms, you no longer, you know, they don't have this anymore, right? So if you now what has to happen is we have to reposition that value statement of what about the microphone close to the user? It used to be, you know, I didn't want to pepper the tables. I was peppering tables with microphones. Now I want to get them off the table and make them disappear. This is the area that I think we are now having to help our clients decide and make strategic decisions and align with partners like companies like yours to help you, give you information about what we're hearing from our users and help you develop products that answer some of those problems.
Right, and still converges with the other technology you're using at the site as well.
I think we still have that one problem, not that it's overlying, is the misconception that technology will solve their bad business practices.
And never.
You know, or change the laws of physics, as you said. Yeah.
Well, you can't.
Having to eat that dog food, right? They're on the other end of those calls.
Yeah.
And
I'll say that I think that is part of, I don't know what the rest on the phone say, but I would say that the amount of that work as a consultant is growing. You know, basically business process, looking at how AV is procured, life cycled, maintained. You know, oftentimes now, you know, I tell people internally, you know, is there any reason that I should be doing AV design? You know, we're going to have an AV integrator on this project. They do AV design. You know, they do this day in, day out. Do you need to see my functionals? You know, or is it all about client experience, driving client experience, explaining the experience? Let the integrator do the design. We're having to bring them in earlier because oftentimes we're doing, you know, they're adding services. AV as a service, you know, lease equipment systems, you know, full-time employees on site at the enterprise managing AV services. So I think what we're seeing is integrators are becoming brought in far more early, and consultants are starting to, you know, rely on the integrators to do what they do best, and we're starting to, you know, shift our focus into more consulting, less design. But another thing I wanted to add before I forget is, and what intrigues me about this whole IP is we're seeing IP becoming this huge player in each of the enterprises. But I think this adoption and where we're heading is going to push cloud much quicker than any of us could even possibly imagine. Already in my enterprises where it's kind of a hybrid broadcast AV environment, a lot of the broadcast components of that are moving into the cloud. AWS, Elemental, IBM Cloud, you know, Brightcove. There's a whole bunch of these services that can do audio and video in the cloud, to the point where what is the day when an AV integrator comes to a client and says, we will drop ceiling microphones and ceiling loudspeakers in a room, and that's it, right? A touch panel, or maybe not even that because it's BYOD, right? But all your audio processing's in the cloud, all your video processing's in the cloud. You know, you've got IP connected display, and so basically anything that can't avoid physics is in the room. Anything that can is just digital. You know, that's sitting on somebody else's computer. And I think people are realizing that is now, you know, our latencies are down low enough, our CPUs are fast enough, where you're going to see that happen so quick.
And I guess 5G is going to push that right along, and as well. Have you guys dealt with that aspect of it yet with 5G?
But we're positioning for it, absolutely, and it's got a lot more to do with things like the ability to do both high speed and information and reaching further into the organization. The challenge is the number of devices and the coverage necessary to be able to do that. And I think it's not, and also I think it's overstated, frankly. A lot of what we're doing with these clients is on the Wi-Fi side, right? So you have to have a really robust Wi-Fi side. We're no longer just doing, a typical mobile device, and bandwidth estimates have to consider the wireless sharing, live video, real-time video with no wires, and I think that's the real key. And what you're getting to is the lack is reducing the amount of infrastructure and carrying things over without having it. And so it's a balance between the two. Just like when we're talking about Zoom versus Teams, it's not an either or. You need to integrate and support both. And we're seeing this from consumer to all through our process. It's positioning products to support next generation technologies, right? The infrastructure needs to be built now. If the products swap out, the infrastructure needs to support the next product, right?
Right. Doesn't matter. Whatever you want to go, as long as you got the infrastructure. Yeah.
It's moving light speed, and that's where the risk is, and also where we have a pretty easy spot, because as we get into structured cable, it's a little bit less conduit capacity than we've had in the years. So it's a little bit easier to pick one device and pull it out and put another one in.
Yeah, 5G right now is mostly on the information side to us, not so much on the AV side. It's, everybody's talking now about the digital twin. I don't know but basically the idea of virtually building your building and operating your building virtually, and having your virtual twin, your digital twin, create effects in the actual building. And so with that, you need a lot of information, a lot of more sensors, the better, right? And that's where the 5G is really coming into play. And I think if you're looking into these types of technologies, again, I'm really big into business information and business analytics. And I think there is a spot for the AV industry in this. The sensors have to go somewhere. The data has to be delivered somehow. And so we need to start partnering with, AI, software analytics houses and things of that nature, so that we can actually use it and present. The problem right now is we don't have something that the clients, we haven't presented something that the client needs yet. We haven't solved the client problem with it yet, but the problems are out there.
Well, maybe you're talking, Brian, about a little bit about building management systems and systems.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's in the conversation that we're having, David, and I'm sure with everyone else, that the BMS, how we're handling the support and integration. It's been a struggle, right, Brian, for years. Everyone's got their own ecosystem.
It hasn't been very structured.
To the side.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no standard across the board that everybody follows.
Yeah, and we've been very lucky in the fact that we've had very little information that we've been sharing. But as things become more intelligent and we start getting more data points, the only way you're going to solve and find troubles, find solutions, is by being able to mine that data, and that's where AI comes in. And so, we are really going to have to start partnering with companies and technologies that we probably aren't doing as much right now, to really take it to the next level.
Yeah, actually, let's go through that scenario, Brian, because I think it's kind of interesting. Let's put it in the perspective of a user. They're going to walk into the building, right? The first thing is they come into the building. They're going to, we obviously know that the device that's going to get through the next year or two is going to be the mobile device, right?
Yeah, they want to use their own device.
No one's touching this one. I got it.
That's right.
It's clean.
Right.
I'm in the building first. Okay, I get
it's actually the 2.6 mobile devices that they're bringing into the building, actually. Yeah.
Yes. So I already know. I already know where I'm going to be sitting, where everyone else is going to be sitting. I've booked my room for 11 o'clock. I walk into the building. It knows that I've arrived. It has the ability to, work with my security system. I'm accessing into the building, and I'm on my way up. So I'm at the doorway. And whether I get a guest, and I'm letting a guest know how they're going to get in there and what their risks may be and how they have to get into the space. I'm working through into the space with some predictiveness of my behavior behavior in alignment with what the building's doing, whether it is, you know, the challenge I think has been that when you try to do these things and you know, user says, oh, that's great, but how do I do it? I already have this building built. I'm not gonna spend millions of dollars to put sensors in. They only cost, if you do it at the start of a building, it's great and easy, but if you do it later, it's really expensive to do. And we're seeing products that actually provide, you know, some of these interactive whiteboards and things like that actually include sensors that check the air quality or check, you know, the heat quality or count the number of faces in a room. So a lot of the analytics and capabilities are being brought in at the appliance level. And that's a brand new concept that then reduces the amount of devices and network connections necessary to be able to do. But the reality is, this is now what I call radical co-location. I have worked remotely and now we're all gonna meet because we have no other choice, right? This one's gotta be real and we all gotta get together. And then I'm gonna leave and I'm gonna say, what did we just talk about? What was our conversation about? And this goes into, and we really need to have a moment to talk through the point of having information ahead of time into our meeting, just like we planned for this call. You know, Steve sends out the agenda, here are the talking points, great. Now we're in this session, great. Now what did we just talk about? Where's that information? Where was it parked? And the challenge around products like Zoom is that they're great for this real-time live session, but after I leave, I got to have my notes somewhere else. What am I using? And the number one product is going to be Office, right? I mean, that's it, unless I'm at Google Hangout. And what I don't see happening here is this conversation of bringing the whole thing in, right? Because the more I stay within that world and can IM, chat, voice, collaborate, do everything I need to do, park my documents, the more I'm aware of what's happening and my situational awareness is much greater. The more I have to drop out and go to another product, the less continuity I have between my peers and my associates. But in that environment, we have to be really careful about losing creativity, right? Because and this goes to this concept around why they made open spaces and why they made people sit in unassigned seats. And the goal there, the fundamental goal was to make collisions. Make people not just have coffee with our peers, but have coffee with people that are strangers. Because in those stranger conversations, we were introduced, Martin, you and I had never met before, right? Or actually may have met, but you're gonna say something that's gonna click in my head that I never heard before, and I'm gonna keep that in mind. And I wouldn't have had that message if I hadn't run into you. And those conversations are much harder to have when we are in these little silos of our little ecosystems and comfort levels. And in a stressed environment, which we're all in, we're heads down, being as productive and effective as we can, but we're making fantastic pencil sharpeners. But what happens when no one longer wants a pencil sharpener? We're gonna be stuck. We gotta think out, we gotta introduce what I would call digital workspace collisions. We have to introduce ways to interact in uncomfortable and new environments in order to be able to learn new things and be able to prosper in our communities and with our clients.
And do that critical thinking that you need to do.
Exactly.
And process it.
It's important that we understand that we need to become valuable business partners as well in those collisions. Like, they need to see what value you bring, and as things become driven more by consumerism and consumer products, that's actually a great thing. It means technology will change. It may be a bit of a headache and pain, growing pains, but the thing that's coming out of this is that there's much more opportunity than there probably ever was. It's just that it's going to be different, and it's going to be a little bit of difficulty understanding what we need to do. But on so many corporate projects that I've done, at the end of the day, the people that really understand, that are the CEO's best friends, generally end up being the AV guy, because he gets them through a lot of things after all of the work has been done and the technology's been deployed. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells us that AV has a lot of value, the integrators and the people, if they understand what they need to do, but there's a lot of value from an operational point of view and an opportunity there. And I think that's something that maybe people aren't really thinking about as they go forward.
Great point. AV is definitely the group that I can do that. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we touch We need to know about cooling. We need to know about lighting. We need to know about acoustics, right? We need to know about about the entire environment. And next thing you know, oh, somebody forgot the lighting interface. Oh, well, we can do that. Somebody forgot the shade control. Oh, well, I guess we can do that, right? So it seems like our industry's is known for that, right? We're the ones that can pick up the pieces that accidentally fell on the floor.
A question from the group that says basically, as an AV consultant, and with everything becoming more cloud and IT centric, as we have discussed, what are you doing to stay on top of the swift changes that are going on right now? How are you educating yourselves? And do you see a day when consultants are made up of IT solution and enterprise architects with more focus on the digital than the physical? So I don't know that we can ever do away with the physical properties as we discussed, but what are you doing to educate yourself, and what solutions do you think you're going to find yourself in a different role in the future than you are now?
I'll take a stab first. So yes, I think we are IT solutions enterprise architects already. We're staffing our consultancy to where we're hiring enterprise architects. The hard part is being independent. As a consultant, I think independency is becoming less important. I've never had a client tell me that they hired me because I'm system agnostic. And I think the way that we approach it is we have team members that focus on Teams and focus on WebEx and focus on Chime, and so we kind of have our internal experts that have to kind of focus on different UC platforms and become more expert to those platforms. And yeah, it gets harder every year to stay on top of things as a consultant. It really does. The amount of information you need to know, and the partners that you need, the partners that are now partners that weren't partners before. Now AWS is a partner of ours, right? IBM Cloud is a partner of ours. Microsoft is a partner of ours, and so when you start getting to that, it takes a lot of energy, and I think again that's where our energies are going to start to steer that way. And they're going to, and because of that, we need to now, things that we're doing now, we need to stop doing so that we can steer that way. And again, I think that's going to be where you're going to see AV consultants continue to drive the design towards the integrators. You're going to, you might see that, right? As far as construction administration services and things of that nature, we're either we might still be doing that, but it's going to be a different business segment. You're going to see us focusing more towards client direct relationships, where a lot of our work is architectural relationships, just based on the fact that we're now in the cloud environment. We're constantly life cycling, and so our life cycle is not project life cycle anymore. It's enterprise life cycle. So there's the shift moves towards the client there. So that's my comments on those.
Anybody else?
I think from jumping quickly, I think from an education standpoint, we're seeing more and more things pop up on Avixa's, as part of Avixa in terms of IT training and network architecture, where before it was, you heard audio, you heard video, and now with the convergence of AV and IT, we're seeing Avixa bring in more training webinars and things like that for networking and how important that is. Being up to date, and seeing that Avixa stepping up to that is a great tool for anybody who's on the AV side that doesn't really know that much about networking. That's a great jumping point to get into networking. And we're seeing a lot more AV professionals taking that extra step beyond that and getting their CCNAs and things like that in terms of network architecture.
And your new hires, right? That's probably what you're looking for, making sure you got that background from them, right?
Definitely, we're not just we're not just AV anymore,
Right.
video and audio, right? We're looking at network architecture. We need to have people on board the team who understand VLANs and all that, and how they affect the AV system.
It's also,
Even Sennheiser does the same thing. We have to think that side. So when we think about people we're hiring, even on the sales side and so forth, they have to be more IT based to understand their customer better.
and I will say, you know, when I'm,
SMW has created ICT, integrated communications technology, and we're really sitting right next to our peers. So also we're getting our certifications in IT, and that's really helped. But what's happened over the last year, David, is a lot of stuff was basically you throw it on to a segregated network and call it done, right? And that's not really the right way to do it. But it's been the easy fix for the short term because really you don't know what the hell was going on. But when you start talking about things like clocking and lip sync and latency and issues like that, they come back to bite you. So there's two things we're doing. First, it's every single device we're talking about that's AV is on the network. If it isn't, it will be soon enough.
Period.
Always.
thank you.
And so therefore we got to think it, and we got to think it strategically. And you have to create environments that match the client's environment, right? If you're going to stage the stuff, it can't just be staged offline, but what switches and what are the protocols, and you got to try to recreate it. And that's not easy. And what we're doing is pushing our manufacturers to say, well, this client's going to have, you know, this level of transport, that IP transport is going to look like this. What happens under contention? How do you work, you know, when you've got all this other stuff on the network at the same time, and prove out the models before they actually get implemented? Because it's extremely expensive and difficult if you get into that environment and you haven't actually thought everything through.
And then you got to change something. Oh.
Well,
Yeah,
exactly. In manufacturers, I would interject with the
Thank you.
manufacturers.
That's where I
The
was going.
problem is that they haven't necessarily matured either in their products. So they, you know, their idea of a product is, yes, it has a NIC card and an application for communication, but that's about it. And then we as the consultants, maybe, I don't know if your experience has been the same, but a lot of what I've learned about IT and the nitty gritty of it is through painful process of learning actually what's not working and why it's not working, because we all thought it should work, and we become the field experts trying to troubleshoot it with the clients. I'm happy, actually. I've had to go through this because it's taught me a lot. But at the end of the day, the manufacturers need to understand that they have to be real strong IT partners as well, in terms of development of the product and the appliances that they put on the client's networks. And to Mark's point, we can't introduce products into a client's network environment that they don't understand or can't support. And every client and organization has a different preference. You know, I would say, you know, the Cisco partner or a Juniper partner or something, they all have idiosyncrasies that are different, and you don't want to introduce something in there that's completely different, because that will ultimately result in an unsuccessful project.
Yeah, I would recommend that they've thrown out a lot of monitoring tools. You can find everything you want now. You can drill down to the packet level. What we need is more best practices, implementation exercises. And what really it comes down to, and I'm sure Dave is going to catch this one, is that for every level of collaboration you want to have, like this Zoom call or whatever, there's an equal and opposite effect in terms of security and information security, right? So a big part of the conversation is this risk versus reward. And in smaller companies, you can get away with a little bit more dynamics and a little bit more of that collaboration. The bigger ones you can't. And so it isn't just putting it on the network and having it on the network. It is managing those risk levels and assessing the risks and helping to understand how to design a network that allows for remote support, remote access, remote ability, or being able to do video conferencing across different platforms, and also segregating the services that you need to protect. And right now, that's from a manufacturer, we're the havers pulling in their best practices. They have to establish best practices. We can use those as a reference point and use as litmus test of what actually is conceivable and then real when you're in practical. But I think
that's interesting, because we didn't really talk about the education. I mean, the security side of it, right? So everything's on the network and so forth. But now the new security needs for all the different devices, right? They'll have to be, as a manufacturer, these now have to be tested a different way now to meet the standards of Microsoft or the client themselves.
And that's hard, because if you look at a typical IT enterprise, you know, they might have 100,000 devices on their network, right? And if they're IT devices, that might be 10 SKUs, right? They got a laptop, they got a desktop, they got a display that they've standardized on. And I'm exaggerating here, but then that same enterprise now has, 1,000 AV devices,
Yeah.
and it's got 999 different SKUs, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you get every single component, and then even gets like, is it necessary? I think you got to back it up a little bit. Go,
That's right.
at what point is it strategically of value to do power over Ethernet and add a switch to be able to power that speaker up? And you have the lighting too. It's not just AV.
Yeah.
I mean, the same thing's happening with lighting as well. You need to find a point where it's strategic and makes sense in that application, and be careful of simply just throwing it all over the fence, which, David, I think was where you're probably getting.
Yeah, any AV integrator that's, defaults to saying, oh, all of our devices need to be static IP, it's all open HTML. I think that we're slowly getting to the point where our world is changing, and manufacturers and integrators are going to, and consultants are all going to have to understand proper enterprise IT. And, we'll be working with dynamic IP addressing, and we'll be working with DNS, and we'll be working with LDAP and possibly radio servers for things that don't have LDAP. And we need to be mindful of baseline configurations and helping our integrators understand what the baseline configurations should be for our devices for security and proper operation. And then it all goes into the ITIL documentation process and change management, which I think as an industry we are poorly lacking in. And as our, if we are going to be 2 nines, 3 nines reliable, we are going to be as entrusted or as considered as important as IT or electricity, then we're going to have these processes in place so that we can guarantee it, right?
Yeah, that's interesting, because it kind of shifts it up. I want to try to get a chance to talk about what we think in our crystal ball of these next generation conference rooms, right? Because we talk about nines now, and it's like, well, wait a minute, we just zoomed. I mean, to what extent are we going to be reliable when we go on there? So maybe we could.
The way you're reliable there is you have, for every conference room you need, you have 2. Right?
Yeah, so, but let's talk about that for a second, because I'm not sure about you guys, but we're seeing what would be, when we have these large sessions, right? These are the stand-up sessions which you have across your firm, where you've got multiple conference rooms together, and everyone's talking, and you also have a live audience in the space, and you have a streamed content going out at the same time, right? You want to, and when we're in a pandemic or any kind of really critical situation, you need to have a really strong communication into your workforce, and any interruption of that is a reference of your inability to provide that level of security and confidence, because it's a reflection of you, right? So the audio starts tripping up, that's going to be like, wait a minute, that's a reflection of the company. So, and yet what I think's happened with our clients coming back going, well, I had a much better experience seeing everybody on Zoom than I ever had in a regular meeting room. What was, the small side of a face in the corner of a tiny little thumbnail in a room, now I'm seeing them full screen, and I got context. I got their room. I got their, I got some relevance to these people. These are people I never would have had a conversation with before, because they're at these senior levels, right? And now I'm seeing their eyes, I'm seeing their face, and it's not just one camera, but it's all the cameras and all the systems. Can't we just take like 5 Zoom? Can't everyone just get in Zoom in a conference room and just connect it all? And won't that work? It's like, no, wait a minute, right? Hang on a second. And yet that is exactly what happens, I think, when people talk about the way you approach technology and innovation or thought processes. You use what you are familiar with, and you take what you're familiar with, and you try to apply it to this next situation. You go, I liked that, I want to do it again. And part of what we do as consultants is explore that a little bit to say, well, what is it exactly that you're trying? What is it that you want, that you're getting out of that? And obviously it's this, right? It's this surface. I'm right here, and it's not that, right? Or if you can say, I'm saying long table, this way. So there are ways to solve this. There are ways, and now with the lower cost products, there are ways to create an experience that could be very similar to this, and bring it in. And this is exactly where SM&W is playing, and this is exactly what we are doing, is listening to what the challenges our clients are saying and say, well, you know what, you could create a stitched environment. You can create a voice control mode, so you can select that, and also a gallery view so you can see everybody in the room, and you can experience those things that you found of value and bring that into the conference. And I think that's kind of where I just wanted to get some thoughts from the other people about what they're seeing in terms of the next generation conferencing rooms based upon what they're hearing from their clients.
Eric, I'd like to throw that one over to you as well, because that's such an important topic.
I mean, the next generation that we've seen and we're doing is we've pretty much moved, kind of what Brian was saying, is everything is kind of just, a microphone, a camera, and the display in the room, and maybe a touch panel. But everything hasn't gone to a cloud. We put it all back in the telecom rooms, which is what a lot of our clients are moving to, mainly for service and support. So they're baby stepping it now, is what we've seen. Is things are moving towards back to the telecom room, or we're referring to IT closet at this point, and living on the network. Perfect example, we have a project with 100 Sennheiser ceiling mics, and they're all actually terminating to patch panels and then patching into the Cisco switches, and then the DSPs are also patching into the same. So we're grabbing that Dante audio. They are moving, all of that to control. So these rooms are getting simplified and easier to manage from the AV and IT staff without having to disrupt a possible meeting, where, when it goes cloud-based, some of these things will make it even easier. You just boot up your, log into the website. Oh, DSP is not working. The virtual DSP or the virtual whatever is not working, and we can control that. That's probably where we're going to be. I wouldn't say, next week, next year, but eventually it'll get there. I might be wrong, I might be crazy, but things are moving that direction. All the companies are coming out with their own cloud control systems as it is, the Crestrons, the Extrons,
Pat,
things
you
like
want
that.
Pat, you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, like we're with the whole convergence of the AV and IT, we're seeing a lot more devices residing on the client network. Like I think the days of standalone switches for Quadrant have gone out the window, let's say, right? And we're moving now to everything residing on the client network, and having those conversations early on with our clients has been extremely important, and starting that conversation as early as possible so that the IT professionals can start wrapping their heads around AV that they never really had to consider before, let's say, right? Adding, having all these network drops for ceiling microphones and touch panels going back to a local switch in the room is come and gone now. We're seeing a lot more data drops being provided for all those devices that go back to the room, to the telco room, and being part of the corporate network. That's becoming more and more important, and it's becoming a lot easier to manage, as Eric said, with everything being on the network. All those tools that the IT professionals have right now for monitoring devices now can extend to the AV system as well. So instead of, getting a call, an AV contractor getting a call saying, I'm not sure what's wrong with this room, something's wrong, we're getting complaints about audio, the IT team can actually troubleshoot that, do tier 1 support, because they've seen that ceiling microphone or that touch panel drop offline, and they can almost do that level 1 support without getting the AV contractor involved. So we've seen that, we're seeing more of that, and I think it's going to just propel ourselves into the future when it comes into those software-based applications for DSP and things like that.
Question from one of the attendees is from Richard Bumpus. He asked, he's enjoyed the conversation about the IT education and AV professionals. Is there a specific, maybe case study that has put some challenges in front of you that have caused you to dig deeper into technologies to answer the requirements of that particular case study that you may not already have been familiar with? So I guess question is there a case study that you can refer to, maybe without revealing the name, that has pushed your need to know more?
I'll jump in quickly, like from a case study for us, not really specific, but once Crestron came out with NVX and we started putting that on a network, on a client network with all the multicasting and IGMP, right away flags got raised there, where we had to start learning a lot about multicasting and all those different things, where in the past it was slowly, layer 1, 2, layer 3, just those basic protocols were important. Getting into now multicast video on a corporate network was one thing that you had to start stepping up your game at that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Streaming content. I thought the question seemed more relevant to education and where to get education information. And one of the things that we did at SM&W and all of the AV team getting our IT certification is we used Lynda, which is a part of the public library system that everybody should have access to. And there's a lot of prep courses for the certifications, actually free. Very, very deep and extensive training helping, because in order to get 100% on those tests, you've got to spend quite a few months just training and developing your skill sets. We did that in a self-paced model as well as team model. So we would go on, take our courses, take each module, and then come back and as a group review the questions and answers that were there we went through all the layers and all the questions that would come up. And that really helped position us in two ways. One, it started to really open up some of the challenges and questions we have that have come on designing the systems and the requirements that aren't in the normal order of things in terms of how you see that from a physical network up. But so that's what I would recommend is use first position yourself into what level of certification you're expecting your team to have and strive for, and then look for methods of providing that internal self-paced training as well as group process to review to position people and reward them for successful completing those certifications.
And as far as the types of certifications or the types of technologies that I think are most important within the audiovisual community, I think CompTIA is definitely for just understanding of standard networking and network security. They have some certifications, A+ and others that we look at. Again, an understanding of IT, basically anything that makes you a better communicator to IT colleagues is really where the focus should be. So understanding ITIL processes, understanding change management, the understanding of Exchange and LDAP is incredibly important. If it isn't to you yet, it's going to be. So really just having kind of those fundamental IT, in general, network switches, most of that's going to be done by the enterprise anyway at enterprise level clients. It's not as important, but understanding VLANs, understanding routing, understanding multicast, IGMP, the fundamentals are far more important.
Trying to blur that line of communication between IT and AV, right? And it's two totally different languages, and a lot of times two different types of personalities you're dealing with as well.
That's right. Yeah, and just to give you an idea, I've had a programmer come into a meeting at an enterprise where we were trying to deploy enterprise management software, and it required VMs and it requires storage and SQL databases and Exchange integration, access to the internet, typical IT stuff, and I'll have someone that understands all of the processes, change management and technologies and ports, and I'll have approval as soon as I walk out of that meeting. I have another person walk in, have the exact same conversation. They don't understand the terminology. They're saying the same things, but they're speaking a different language. And next thing you know, the approval takes a month, right? So it's
Yeah, I would also add to that conversation that often happens. People walk in and say that they'll send the white paper on audio communication or video communication across their network, and they hope that that solves all
Yeah,
of
right.
it.
Yeah, that doesn't solve anything.
The guy is,
Here's the one
that
sheet. Go
circular
ahead.
filing cabinet,
I would add to
Yes,
that
yeah.
that we used to have we have what's called room ready, right? It's the room needs to have all this stuff in place and be clean and ready to go. But now it's really network ready that's critical. So before we even go into the room, those network services have to be up and operational. So what we'll typically do is have a whiteboard session with the team, which isn't just the owner, and it isn't just the IT infrastructure and IT systems person, it's also AV person there as well, right? And we walk through and map out all of the different interdependencies. Our new reference point is what we call an AV IT matrix, right? Which is all the devices on the network and what they're supposed to do. And then off to the side are all of the different various, accounts that they have to be associated with. If I'm doing room reservation, then I have to have a room reservation account. I have to be able to combine calendaring. I mean, really, the same premise still comes up whether we are tomorrow or the next day. You want to be able to walk into a room and hit, see a meeting and hit the join button. That's the definition of simple. And to get there behind the curtain, we've got to have all of these different network devices talking, not just to physical points and ports, but actually talking to calendaring and reservation systems as well, to be able to be, set the proxies up. All these things have to be kind of mixed together. Because I don't think our clients really want to get into those weeds. They're expecting us to have those conversations, and yet every one of our trades are working in little circles. So our job as a consultant is kind of corral all those different people and say, do you understand what you need to do? Do you understand what you need to do? And look at where there may be a gap in either an understanding, or at least to establish what we call, the hoop for what success looks like. I'm going to come in and verify, and these things all have to be in order before I can be able to do that.
You become the focal point. But you mentioned something that's really interesting, Mark, that I'd like to bring up to the colleagues, perhaps just in their discussion. But it's the AV, and the role of the AV integrator and the AV consultant is changing in many ways. But one of the factors that is changing it is how projects are delivered when it comes to construction. The construction management process now is basically, that process in and of itself is all about the deconstruction of a project and breaking everything down into smaller pieces, and turning what used to be trades with a lot of skill sets into trades that are basically hands and feet. Like I remember years ago that trades would have in-house engineering to do the electrical work and things like that. And what we're finding is now, over the last decade, but specifically in the last 5 or 6 years, is that those projects now just have smaller companies and trades delivering and building per whatever the construction manager says. And the construction managers don't understand the final operations or technology at all. And that's where we find ourselves in a really important role, to your point, of corralling all of these people and bringing together the understanding of what this all means at the end of the day. Because after the photographs are taken of the building, now we have to make it work. And we as the consultants and the AV consultants are always the ones that seem to be there the following year, helping them through all of that process. So, I find that one of the things that we all collectively can do in the AV industry is to actually show that skill set and not be afraid to bring that skill set, but be prepared to bring that to the rest of the whole team.
It's also changed a little bit too, and this because we only got a little bit of time, I just wanted to get I talked at the very beginning about wireless sharing. And I talked about that in this magic upper right-hand quadrant. And I got there from looking at, when in the post-pandemic world, how do I avoid risk, and how do I allow, a way for clients to create systems that are going to be least costly and give them the most amount of value in return. And where we're seeing that is really a reduction in room hardware that people have to touch, right? And keeping the ability for me to know what I'm bringing into these spaces and what I'm going to have and what I know is going to happen when I go into that room and I can experience it. Because again, it starts with that. I really want it to be simple. I want it to be useful. I want it to be easy. Easy comes with familiarity, right? I know what it's going to look like, and consistency. I know it's going to be from room to room. And the more I have the ability to know what it is, because I bring it myself, the more I'm going to have those expectations. And we moved from bring your own device to share content, and just in the last year, bring your own device to make a meeting, right? So I've taken that to, I can plug in my HDMI cable, and I can plug in my USB cable, and I could take my laptop and use the camera and the microphone and speakers, and it's my, my steering wheel on my laptop. Let's go, okay. And then that just in the last couple of months broke because changed or raised, I guess, to wirelessly doing that. So I can wirelessly connect to the device in the room and use those same devices, use the same camera and everything. And I didn't have to plug in a USB or HDMI cable at all. And so the amount of infrastructure required, I had no cables necessary at the table at all, is really where the next generation of users, our gens and behind us, are all there already, right? So it's really leading in the older crews that expecting that HDMI cable. This tether or holding on to the security and reliability of these older systems, we've got to back up and say, well, is that value greater or less than the movement forward, right? How much belt and suspenders do you need if you're already into Zoom here and you're not doing in server-based MCUs like we used to have, right? You've broken the mold already. So when I go into wireless sharing, okay, I got BYOD, BYOM, or BYOC, however you want to do it, for meeting or conference room. And I think the next one here is bring your own calendar, right? Because the problem happens with, I've got a room booked, and now with the pandemic, there's a pretty good chance I may not be using that room. Or if it is that room, I got half of rooms because, I've got half the people in the room. So I got, people asked in the chat, what are the things here? Obviously, room reservation technology is key to know how many people, you can set into those room limits and how many people you can fit, and when trace back who was in those rooms, and all those sorts of things start to happen. So bring your own meeting means now I want to bring my own calendar. I want to be able to go in a room and have my calendar be the room calendar, right? It shouldn't matter where I'm having the meeting to happen. And this goes to the next thing, which is bring your own voice control, bring your own Alexa. The problem with Alexa integration today, for those that are thinking about trying to do that, is it's associated with a room account. So in room 5, I go into room 5 and say, Alexa, start my meeting. As long as I've invited room 5 to the meeting, it'll go, oh, do you want to start such and such a meeting at 2:30? Yes, I do. Okay, great. But if I go into another room and I hadn't invited that, doesn't know I exist, right? And so we have to get to the point where I can bring my own Alexa, my own voice control with my devices, the speed with which I can get to my content. We talked about what's important, audio and video, and yes, audio is the critical one, and the next one is content, right? The faster I can get to where my content is and share it, the more productive my session's gonna be. And the reality is we're talking with virtually, my content could be on Brian's server, it could be an Eric's server, it could be my iVoice, we could have 15 different freaking copies of this. Which copy is relevant to our conversation? And this is what we challenge now. Our next challenge is finding out, of all of us together, we're all here in a circle, is there any relevant content that's out there that's associated with us? And where is that? Because if we're all sitting in Microsoft land, we should know that. If we're all in Google driving, we should all know what files we've been working on. And we shouldn't have to figure out 15 different versions of where that is. That's, I think, where we
That's
need
the
to get
challenge.
to.
That's the challenge. The content flow and the archiving of it as well. Is there a worry then of sort of digital overload for clients as you think about all these technologies? We've all been pushed into this, especially now. Is there a worry there of digital overload for clients and for users?
In that they haven't been overloaded with Zoom already.
I know.
That is actually an issue that we see, because there's many different applications, and there has to be a much more unified approach. And maybe as we move to the cloud, I deal with various different people, but I would say government officials and things like that, they have a limited amount of time to spend on learning programs and everything, and the way people work nowadays, they're expected to be able to do handle the Zoom call and things themselves, and So we're seeing, that people are expressing their frustration now. Maybe they were expressing their frustration about some of the AV, but now they're expressing their dissatisfaction with just the number of technologies that are presented to them, and
Right.
Microsoft gave them the office environment, so you kind of got used to it there. But now we're talking about, disparate companies doing different things. Some of them, the concepts are the same, but some of them are different. I mean, if you go from a Zoom call to a Teams call, trying to find how you launch a meeting is quite a bit different for the uninitiated user.
At an enterprise I was talking to, they've standardized on WebEx, and they do not, the firewall prevents any other conferencing solution. And they said we were trying to go to another enterprise manufacturer. They too had a standard, and it was Teams, and they too had firewall issues where they could not utilize any web collaboration other than Teams. So the call was, how do we talk to one another?
I just want to talk to you. I just want to talk to you. That's all I want to do. And
in the end, they started. The one company said, "You know what? We'll use our personal devices." They use BYOD because the client one, right? But I think we are going to start seeing, these interoperability issues. I think where it would be great if we could start seeing some standardization where there is interop between some of these environments. Information overload. I think,
Brian, hasn't it come to the point where we used to have conversations with our clients about user interface, right?
Yeah.
We used to do that. We've moved to this pivot point where all the web platforms are driving the user experience.
That's right.
That becomes the common vernacular today, right? That's the common vernacular.
Yeah, our point is, the same experience you have on your phone, you have on your desktop, you have in your meeting space, you have in your event venue, right? It should be seamless. Yeah, I think that's where everyone's heading, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing is what's next, right? So that we stay ahead of that. That clients, we have to avoid clients from getting themselves entrenched into a single platform. It's rich, but then what happens when it changes? As it becomes lighter and more flexible, like web platforms, the more likely that innovation is going to have you leapfrogging. If a customer, for example, very specific example, is on Zoom today, right? They're investing in Zoom and they have Zoom hardware and Zoom appliances. When they recognize what Microsoft can do for them, because Microsoft may have not been helpful last year, but now they're a remarkable success story in what they're doing in terms of Teams, then they go, well, what do I do to get over there? Well, if you do it right, you can just change the underlying operation system and be able to do that. That's this light positioning, and it's going to move again. That the dynamics of what's driving the user experience is way out of our actual shaping, and we're actually reacting to those environments. And where we have the least amount of input from a consultant point of view is back into those platforms, which is really where we need to be, is helping driving those conversations. And the reason why is those conversations are being driven with the enterprise clients and other people that spend a lot of money on their products, and they're more looking at the individual experience as opposed to the room experience and the conference room and the group experience. And one of the things that sets us apart and the AV industry apart is we're much more involved in the group rooms, meeting spaces, and the products that most of the time, like Microsoft and others that are developing, are individually based. And they're not 5 people in the room all Zooming, right? That we just talked about that. This is what we need to bring back to the equation, is how do you take those products that are out there that are used individually and put them in a room of 20 people or 100 people or an arena and make them work.
And I think our industry's been doing a much better job at that, especially from the manufacturer side. If you looked at what was the standard camera for most UC environments in the past, it was basically a stick camera of some variety for each of these vendors. And now you look at the number of cameras and microphones that are supported in majority of UC environments. And, I think part of it's because, the Apples, the Ciscos, the Amazons of the world have conference rooms as well. Thank goodness for that, right?
That's the point, right? It's got to work for them too.
It's got to work for them too, thank goodness. But I think also our industry has gotten to the point where we can have these conversations with these IT companies, speak intelligently, They have confidence in us, right? And we are now able to partner better. And that's great. I think our industry has done a tremendous job, you know, and I think we are moving that piece of it forward because, you know, where they're selling 1 billion devices, you know, in the personal space, how many conference rooms, you know, are, you know, they're selling billions of dollars rather than billions of devices in our space, right? So, so we kind of have to be driving that. So I think there's always going to be a place for us there because of, you know, their market focus and ours. And I think that's great.
Yeah, that's changed for us as well as a manufacturer. Those we've our collaborations with Microsoft and others, and they recognize that need as well to collaborate with us so that their solutions can work out in the field better as well. And it's remarkable how that's changed even over the past 6 months.
And I will say, as a consultant and as an integrator, you know, there's something to be said about staying in an environment, right? So, you know, the idea of being a Microsoft environment and the amount of convergence and the ability to maintain user interface and user experience across all platforms, you know, for Microsoft, whether it's the desktop, you know, I would say phone, although that's not so much, but, you know, Xbox or, you know, other phone too with iOS, right? I mean, basically, you know, you can maintain your experience across many different platforms. Same with Amazon, right? With Amazon Cloud, Amazon Chime, you know, so, and I think for us, the hard part is you actually have to understand the platforms at such an in-depth level. Like, you know, it's no longer just a AV device sitting there. It's an entire ecosystem sitting there. And you have to know all the bits and pieces of the ecosystem and what other ecosystems that ecosystem can touch. And again, that kind of goes back to my independence
issue.
issue.
What you're talking about, Brian, is that the conversation or the real-time collaboration is just one small component of a larger architecture, right?
That's right.
And that we have to recognize that the value of collaboration isn't just this immediacy, but it has to be. And some companies do it well. You know, Slack is an example of that. Teams in Cisco, Teams in Microsoft. The focus on real-time collaboration, which is absolutely critical, and I know we're running out of time here, has to be balanced with what we do with our documentation and our other tools. And it shouldn't be, as I think Brian is saying, you know, having to figure out the whole product suite. There's a lot there, right? It's a rich environment. There's a lot of different tools and Easter eggs of things that you can find within the product space. I'm sorry, Brian. David, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying we're okay for time. It's okay. I know we're running low, but this has been great. So no worries if we go a little bit over.
I'd like to just mention we do have some universities out here in the audience as well, and there was an earlier question posed, but I would probably stipulate that a lot of the enterprise solutions and challenges that we've been talking about are every bit applicable to a educational environment as well.
Well, actually, it's slightly different. It's slightly different, and I'll give you an example of that. Okay. Because I'm working with some clients right now that in the last couple of months, the force to Zoom has made it so instruction said to move over to a completely, well, we had distance learning forever, but now they're actually realizing it works. And yet it only works if your teaching and your methodologies are designed towards distance learning models, right? You can't just take a math class, stick it on the Zoom and expect it to work, right?
Or music student, you know,
or music student. Yes, and so there's the ability to bring this into, and I guess maybe what you're saying, Steve, is correct, is that instead of just looking at this as parking it on a Zoom call or doing a live Zoom call, there are learning management platforms that are designed to incorporate the real time and then post real time. So in reality, this is not what the corporate environment is really should be leveraging. So if we have this call and it happened to be a class, if I could give my students that class and review it, and so I'm going to do that. I'm going to record it because one thing is we know not everyone's going to show up for class, right? And so I want to be able to record it so they can watch it on their own. And yet when I get ready for my test, I can now watch that, which I couldn't do if I only took my class live. So I get a value proposition that actually was higher than it was before. We're not doing that in corporate yet. We should be. So it's saying, you know what, I couldn't make that meeting. Let's record it, which we can do, but where do you park it? So you have to park it in a place that's relevant. That's what these learning management platforms allow you to do. So I can now add my slides, add my lecture, add my notes. So we want to make sure that our educational clients are taking the opportunity to strategically align a long-term proposition where they've been forced into Zoom is to be able to carry that concept over into the learning management platform and to reinforce the richness that this opportunity creates, so that whether the instructor's remote in the classroom and teaching from home, it's got continuity. Whether the students are remote or whether they got to watch it later, they actually have more value than they can. And then it goes into what content do I teach? How do I teach effectively? Well, I got a chroma key here now, right? So this weather map, I'm now in the content. I can take you on a virtual tour. I couldn't do that before. I can bring you to a swamp you probably wouldn't want to go to, or a military base you probably couldn't get onto, and I can do that virtually. And also what it does, which is really interesting, is it makes it equal. So if you do it right, if you apply the right technologies, the experience of being local in the room is at the same level as a remote student, because they're all watching on a monitor because they can't get all that information uniquely in the room. If you're doing a dry marker board and you can see the board, then you have a significant advantage over someone who's remote, right? So you can use you can use some certain devices to be able to capture the board and be able to do that. But the point is you need to level set and balance. Just like in enterprises, if you create different levels of engagement, some voice, some video, you start to bifurcate the groups. They become siloed. There's a process, actually, there's a Allen's Law. And Allen's Law describes that you have more familiarity and proximity with the people you're closest to, right? So even though David and I are actually, we know we're in the Boston area, so we're probably going to more likely to collaborate there than Martin and I, because Martin's up in Canada, right? So even though we're remote, our minds and our methodologies become more within our local proximities. And by opening up the platforms, we haven't necessarily created a solution. You have to expect that to happen and encourage those conversations to happen. Just because you're all on the same platform doesn't mean that's going to happen. I'm sorry, I'm kind of long-winded, Steve, but I think there are quite a few exciting things happening in the educational environment that we have to look at. Instead of being happening to us, we have to look at it happening for us and moving the entire process of learning and becoming more accessible to information and take advantage of that.
That's a good perspective. Thank you, Mark.
Maybe I also want to comment on the education side of things before we start wrapping
I
up.
would echo Mark's sentiments, and the one thing I would add to it is that they also have to look at, once they move out into the virtual world, it's a different support model, and you have to create a support model that makes the end user experience comfortable and transition to it, and know how to engage and connect and everything. Once that happens, it becomes a completely different world for them. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, as Mark said.
You bring up a great point. I had a client that said, we can't, teachers have to do everything. We have hundreds of classes starting, a day. We can't afford, it, right, Martin? And so,
Yeah.
Wait a minute, that's the challenge that gets us to the moon. Stop there and assuming that you can't create a virtual support model that fits within your cost model. For example, bots. If you're in Microsoft, if you can chat in help, or AV help or whatever, you can get to anybody that's within that bot group and see that chat and respond wherever you are in the world, right? There are methodologies to getting support to work. So the first thing is to break down the assumption that you need bodies locally, right? And how much you can do remotely, and create this model that allows to have a ton of classes happening with the least amount of resources, Martin, right? Because obviously that's the trick.
Absolutely.
But it can be done. It can be done to a certain level of where they're, where the SLA is, right? Where, at what point does it have to be back up? Is it tomorrow? Is it within 24 hours? You have to establish those, governance rules to measure, okay, it's got to be up within an hour. That's going to cost you a lot more than next week.
Okay. You okay for questions, Steve? Pretty much. Did we get most of them?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dave, a few notes from the chats.
Sure.
The chat has been incredibly disciplined. Just originally a few hellos from different places around North America, Florida, Massachusetts, Canada. So we salute everyone in North America and external to North America. For the rest, one good example of manufacturers being a good IT partner. Also, Brian, thank you very much for jumping in and throwing in some names for IT education examples, CompTIA and ITIL, VIX, of course, and so on and so on. So thank you very much, Brian. And that's it for the chat, really.
Excellent. Okay. Any last comments from everybody? We covered quite a bit, and I thought it went really well. Really great information talking about this whole change we're in the middle of, and some future thinking as well. Any last comments from anybody from the field?
Sure, I do. I mean, I think one of the things that comes up, let's get back to the practical. What do I do now if I got a project in flight? I mean, I'm about to put in place I've made all these decisions, and now my AV, which should have already been decided by June, which is typically the month that we do our decision making, our final view of the product. I can't even see these products, right? Or I backlogged on my, you can't get a Logitech camera anywhere now because they're all outsold everywhere. So
That's
what
true.
do I do? Well, how do I
You
do this? And there's a couple things that are important to think about with that projects in flight that I would do. The first thing is to stop and take a breath and reevaluate. You should absolutely reevaluate using that criteria we were talking about before, strategic criteria. What's the weighting? What are the important things for you to consider? The products that are being released today may not, two things may happen. Either they may not be in supply enough, so you better buy it up now if you're about to do it. And so therefore, there's manufacturers, they don't know. I mean, they may know, but they may not know, or they may not have enough insight as to what's happening. Many of those companies are, reducing their staff forces. So it's hard to tell the ripple effect. So if you're at risk of not having a product and it works, buy it. If you're not sure if that product is going to work, you should be looking forward and evaluating newer products that may be able to find that in. So you put in place markers now. And and particularly if you're going to be buying it later, and hold off on the buy as long as you can. Use the consultant models that we have in your system integrators to reevaluate product. I mean, I'm doing it even though I'm remote. I can do a lot of evaluation of product, and I'm also going to start to look at how to provide remote support and remote diagnostics and remote capabilities. And you really want to look at that. And I think a conversation I'd like to have with the consultant community more is to drive that remote requirements conversations back into manufacturers and service providers, so that there is an equal level of understanding. Just the way the vernaculars happen on, the mute button is, or is green, is red, and green when you're talking, and all of the knobs make sense when I get into a car. This hasn't happened on the management tool platform. Everyone's doing their own little ecosystem of management of products. And so what we really need to do is steer that conversation. It's just like we're talking with building management and other areas of AB and IT. It's coming around and corralling the providers and creating a language, that our clients are looking for, and in communicating that back, it's that everyone feels comfortable. They don't have to be fighting up a chain pole of the best, tool to support their microphone system, for example. It's got to play well with all the other products as well. So that's something that I'd like to engage and offer to the people on this call to work with me on that kind of environment to create an opportunity for people for manufacturers and others to provide a common platform for those things to work.
Thank you, Mark. Eric, any last comments or tips in starting projects in this environment and so forth?
I mean, I think everybody that's put a project on hold is going to, eventually these projects are going to come off hold. And I think all of us as consultants are going to either have a scary fall when, the floodgates open and it's going to be, okay, now what? Because we're all going to be looking for more staff potentially to help do these designs. I know we have a potential backlog out there that is substantial with the whole projects, and depending upon what happens with COVID and how things are. I mean, construction is still going on. It's insane, here in Charlotte. There's more tower cranes up than I've seen in a long time. And it's nuts, but I have a feeling once, everything goes back to normal, it's going to be insane construction wise, just as a world.
And like Mark was saying, thinking then about research and what's available, supply chain issues, et cetera, working closely with manufacturers, making sure we got stuff for the project as things start to increase. Yep.
I mean, the lead times have gone crazy for some products. I mean, just displays for some, depending upon where they're coming from. I mean, we all know where they're coming from, but some of them are just sitting on ships right now for a month or two, waiting to come into port. So we've had that trouble already. So we do have to think about that.
Brian, any last comments?
No comments. Just thank you, Sennheiser, for putting on this this presentation. David, you've been great, and thank you all for the attendees for taking your time out of your Friday to sit and listen to us old men to talk about what we love, obviously.
Thank you, Brian. Martin?
I would just add that, COVID has maybe put a pause. Maybe it's given us an opportunity to catch that bit of a fresh break and new perspective. But I think the AV business and is evolving, and I think that there's lots of opportunity here. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a little hectic for a little while as we transition. But it's now's the time for anybody that's involved with these projects that have been on hold to reach out and have those discussions, and become make sure you're a participant in the business decisions. You already have those relationships, and I think it's important. It'll be really helpful for your clients. I've been doing that, and they are really appreciative of it because they don't know what to do and they don't know what they don't know. And that's the job of the consultants. And I think it's a pretty interesting time. And I'd also like to thank Sennheiser for this and all my colleagues on this Zoom call. It's been very enlightening and fun.
Thank you, Martin. And now a good time for people at home that are listening now. If you are at home and are able to get out, a good time to do some of these courses and do some online learning to get involved on the IT side and the AV side as well.
Can I add one thing? And I think Brian sort of touched on this, but I want to really emphasize this. We need more diversity in our organizations, in our community. We're really, really lacking in color and in gender and in age. And if there's any way that we can excite you about this industry, because I believe, for one thing, to me, it's not work. It has never been work. It's been an exciting, fantastic roller coaster ride. We know tomorrow's never the same as the day before. And I just don't understand why. There's something that I don't know why, but I really want to encourage everyone to reach out and try to bring in more diversity of thought. It's only going to help. And we have a whole great opportunity to rethink and reimagine only when we come together with new thoughts and new perspectives. And I'd really like to just make sure that message gets heard to everybody on the call.
There are a lot of great organizations out there that are really pushing that, and yeah, feel free to email or any of us and we can point you in the right direction. But yeah, I think also just get involved, whoever you are. But yeah, absolutely, Mark, I completely
agree. Points.
Yeah, ways is sponsorship and mentorship, right? Reaching out to universities and colleges, providing, and we do that, and I think it's an important part of our responsibility is to, as you're saying, Brian, is to bring in people at low cost and low risk to them to get them engaged. They don't all have to be, EEs to do this, and you can come in it from wherever your perspective and background in any door in is going to just be an enrichment to our community.
Thank you, Mark. Pat?
I guess just to close, for me, it's one thing that for anybody who's designing a system now, I think now, and I mentioned to the group earlier before we started the broadcast, was the far end now is almost just as important now as the people physically in the room, in the meeting room. So if you're putting systems together, or if you're budgeting for AV, or thinking of new rooms, the far end people, the people who are joining remotely now, are just as important as the people locally in the room. So think about audio quality, the microphones, think of the video quality, and think of the acoustics of the room too. I think we talked about earlier was, the reverberation of the room. One thing that we do as consultants is we don't just look at the AV systems, we look at all the things that work with the AV system and that will affect it, such as room acoustics, mechanical systems, things like that. So it's important to consider all of those when we're looking at the room designs. But for anyone out there, as you can see now with all of us on Zoom, remote participants should be considered just as equal as physical people in the room too. So just keep that in mind, when you're designing rooms and things like that.
Thank you, Pat. And that's a great point. That's something we touched on, but we didn't go take that off ramp too far, talking about the acoustics of the room and the room design, to work with the more distant miking that we're doing these days. So a great point to think about the acoustic side of the room itself. And that's a whole nother discussion.
Not just the room, but also the remote. I thought you were going to talk, Pat, about the remote users. And what we're getting into now is the ability to create standardized kits that are deployable to the executives, the home users, these people that need to have a really very high quality experience, although it's over Zoom or whatever. There's a certain level that you can put into those places to make those traders and others as effective as possible. So we've extended would have been, Pat, those designs in the rooms to the home user, because really the owners and everybody's thinking, do I need that office space? Do I need that many square feet? Can I uplease at a smaller number of spaces if I go virtual, Brian, right, or bring my servers out? To what level can I take that money I would have spent on hard surfaces and spaces and bring it home? Well, that means you need to have a really good experience at home. You have to be really engaging and capable of doing what you're doing at home, from all the way through from bandwidth and modems to cameras and microphones, all need to be considered packaged and supported, right, by the tether and VPN connections and things like that back into the network that make that successful. So that I believe is absolutely now within our bailiwick as consultants to bring those answers into our clients.
Thank you, Mark. Well, excellent, guys. This was fantastic. I mean, we went over, but I don't care, because it was just really a great conversation to hear all you guys talking about your different experiences and actually talking about examples and how you all work. I think it was a really good collaborative effort of ideas and discussion. So thank you, Eric and Brian, Pat, Mark, Martin, for taking the time to do this. This was just fantastic. Thank you to my colleagues, Steve and Fred, for watching the chats and the questions. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can do this again, and maybe 6 months, a year from now, and kind of discuss it and see how we're looking at things we talked about. Is that really happening now? It'd be really interesting to get that take in the future. So I'm going to launch a quick poll for everybody, because we do like to do a little poll, make sure we're on target with everybody, and if any way we can do things better here at Sennheiser during these forums. We'd love to do these and share information for everybody. So I hope this was helpful for everybody. And I'll just give a minute or so for this, and then I'll close down the meeting. But thank you guys all very much, and I love your backgrounds. Very nice.
Thank you, everyone.
And
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much.
Everybody here are getting great reviews on the chat. So lots of thank yous and congratulations on the chat.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Have a great
David,
weekend,
for
everyone.
hosting us too,
Thank you.
keeping us all corralled. Appreciate that.
Our pleasure, Mark. Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun, man. I love doing these.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye,
Thanks, guys.
everyone.
Great. Thanks.
Guess we're gonna hang up now, or is that
You
what we're gonna
can,
do?
yeah, you can if you want.
Waiting for
I'm
the
just going to
poll
wait for the
results to come
poll.
in.
You want to see them?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting good. I can share the Zoom. As you guys know, the Zoom reporting is fantastic. They do a really great job of the analytics on it. So I can certainly share this with you. But we got a lot of greats, and I think if you guys see in the chat, we got some really nice comments as well.
Was herringboning as much as it is.
You look fine.
Do not wear checks.
Isn't that video conferencing rule 101,
Yeah,
Mark?
thanks,
Like wearing
Breaking
green
that
on
out.
TV.
At least we all of us didn't forget to unmute ourselves, so that was good.
Yeah.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
great. Yeah. All right.
But
Got
also
the,
because we're not in these rooms with the lawnmowers outside the door, dogs
Yeah,
barking,
that's
or
true.
other things that could be happening in the background while we're talking.
I was waiting for my toddler to have a fit outside of my home office here, so I was trying to monitor that closely.
Mark, your Dallas office behaved themselves pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark Peterson. Yeah.
What was that?
Your Dallas office behaved themselves very well during the event.
Were they on the call?
Yeah, you had a couple of the guys.
Houston, we're talking.
Houston, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
but 62% was great, and 27% was good. Is what I have, and
Okay.
I'll look at the comments and see.
What was the primary background or result, end users result of the questions 3 and 4?
What is your background? So education and corporate, 27% to 31%. Media and entertainment, 23%.
Oh, we could have done some more there then.
Right. Got some contact information. I am an end user, 13%. Consultant, 31%. That's nice.
Oh wow.
Yeah. System integrator, 19%. Other was 31%.
Whoa, what is that?
I
That's a
don't know
big
what other is. Yeah, maybe. Well, sometimes they don't want to say, right? They don't want to. They want to say whether they don't want to give out information. But that's a nice mix, though. I think. Excellent. Well, good.
Okay.
All right, guys.
Yeah, you still have a couple questions in the box. I'm not sure if you want to answer them later on. I think there was, I think I answered one, I thought. Great discussion. Thanks. Okay. All right, we're good. I'm going to head out. Thank you very much. Have a
Thanks,
good
guys.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate
Thanks,
it. Stay
guys.
safe out there, huh?
Thank
You
you.
too. Bye bye.
We'll talk soon. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.